So good. Welcome everyone who joined in to the series on the Global Icon called the Global Icon Interviews. And we have the most wonderful and innovative and someone who's brought a lot of changes in the world of music and audio listening environments, both for the creators and for the listeners. So please meet Arthur Noxon.
Hello, hello.
Art,
Good to meet
thank
you.
you.
Glad you're here.
Yes, no, and thank you so much. We are a great, privileged to have you as a partner with the Global Icon, the series, which kick off now. And also, to have known you over all these years, thanks to Bruce, when he made the introduction. It's been many years now.
Yes.
And but your work has been so inspiring. We've done our spin on it in territories where we've not been able to bring the TubeTraps yet, and we will talk about that too. But thank you so much, for coming online and sharing the information that you will today. So
I'm glad to.
yeah, so would love to understand where did this all start out for you? Acoustics. Which years were these? How were the times during then? So let's start like from the beginning.
Oh, the beginning. I was young, a teenager. My aunt said, Arthur, can you make a sound come out of that giant flower pot that's hanging in the grape arbor? And I said, sure. And that was the beginning of my work because I realized when I was done that my family was happy. My aunt and uncle were happy. And I realized that I could make people happy by making sound better. And really that has never left my whole life. So my kind of like power behind my work is what's family happiness because of my work. Then I did my mom's house, and then someone else's, and then someone else's. So in those days it was hooking it up to no one had a hi-fi system. They just had a box, a console, and you had to go in there and hook up in the back of the console and then run the wires through the house hidden, and then hook up the speakers. That was what was going on back in those days. At any rate, later I went to school, became an engineer and acoustics, and I invented the bass trap because I kept running into situations where I need a full bandwidth solution. There was always plenty of treble range absorption and diffusers, but there was no bass traps in those days, and that's the early 80s. And so I kind of got mad and just, out of my schooling and experience with acoustics. And I mean, I am a licensed acoustic engineer, and I was then at that time. And so I just created a bass trap out of my common sense. And one thing led to another, a long story, but the TubeTrap was discovered and became a worldwide phenomena in almost overnight. So it's sort of like a Cinderella story. It's an amazing thing. It was not a business plan. It was all by accident or something, but it certainly wasn't because I wrote a business plan. I don't know anything about business. I know acoustics. That's it. That's all I ever cared about.
No, I think so. So when did the bass trap and the tube trap, when did it start getting noticed in the professional, let's say, audio industry? Which is, right. I think both sides. It could be, let's say, the pro audio for the studio and the makers of music,
right,
and also the retailers who actually retail for the listeners. Great hi-fi systems.
The recording engineer side of the industry was very quick. They didn't miss a beat. They were ordering, the big recording studios, Hit Factory, things like that, were ordering pallet loads, 1 or 2 pallet loads of TubeTraps in those days. And they never would want to talk to me about anything because the recording engineers are not interested in chin boogie, as they would say. Someone talking a lot and explaining this and that and trying to convince someone of something. They said, listen, don't talk, just send them over, we can return them if we don't like them, right? Yes. Okay, well, that's all we need to know. So yeah, give me 2 pallets. That ought to be enough to figure out what's going on. And so that was it. And then another studio would do the same thing, and another one. I don't know how they found out about it, but they keep their ear close to the ground of what's going on in technology in the audio industry. And the TubeTrap was, a new shining star at that time.
And was it, did you reach out to publications, or did a lot happen through word of mouth and through which were the magazines or newsletters during those years that would have led to the more awareness of what you were developing?
Right. Initially, our company was signed on with Monster Cable. So we were a Monster Cable company, and we were initially distributed by Monster Cable. And the TubeTrap was called a CSP1. And Noel Lee was the owner, still is, of Monster Cable, I guess. And he was great. And he was an electrical engineer with a brain for marketing. And he's found that the interconnects between components in the audio chain were completely ignored. And so he decided, well, there's a hole in the marketing, in the line card, so to speak. And so he started developing and looking for products that cleaned up the interconnect between components. Well, the last component in the audio chain is the human and the ear. And the last component, electronic component in the audio chain, is the loudspeaker. And so it was natural that he's looking for something that cleans up the last link in the audio chain, which was the air in the room. And he had a huge panel, which is awful. I forget what it was called. And but it resonated when the music played. But it was still a sound panel. But that was his attempt at it. But he was an acoustic engineer. And then he found out about TubeTraps at a consumer hi-fi show. And the next day we were signed and became a TubeTrap Monster Cable company.
Wow.
So that was the it's not like nobody launched or marketed and managed the launching of the TubeTrap. One of the kings in the industry did that for us. But the TubeTrap didn't take up very quickly, and so Noel had given a pile of TubeTraps to a fellow called Peter Moncrief, who wrote what's something called an International Audio Review. Moncrief is a genius, and he would he was like a product reviewer, and back before there were product reviewers, and so Noel Lee got some TubeTraps, and then he said, "Well, give me some more." And I said, "Okay, give me some more." And then he said, "Okay, give me some more." And finally, he had 60 of them. And then a year later, he publishes his review. It took him that long to figure out what to do with TubeTraps, as many as you could get your hands on. Finally, he published a paper, and the next day the phone is ringing. Fortunately, I had the same phone number. I never lost it. Still do have that same phone number, 800 ASC Tube. That was the phone number. And the phone started ringing from all over the world because his magazine, his review magazine, went to all the high-end dealers in the world. And so they instantly, within a day or two, realized, oh my God, something has happened in the industry. And they called, and with all these different accents from all these different countries, I was shocked because I had no orders for a year, solid year, and all of a sudden, boom, we're in business. And by that time, Noel Lee, Monster Cable, and Acoustic Sciences had separated because there was no action going on. Had we waited 3 or 4 more months before we said, okay, that's enough of that, it's not going to work, Noel Lee you'd be talking to Noel Lee instead of me, probably, because we would still be a Monster Cable company, probably. But anyway, that's how it happened. So, I don't know, that's not part of a business plan. You can't plan that. It's just serendipitous. It's just the right thing in the right place, in the right person's hand tumbling from one person's hand to another person's hand to another person's hand. It wasn't, you couldn't create it, you couldn't dream of it, and yet it happened.
So I have a question. With studios being designed every day all over the world, what is it about studios then that brings about either a consistency or an inconsistency? You know, if it is, is it
Right.
is it that particular a science, or is it also a little bit like predicting the weather?
So
you know, so
there's the traditional studio is based on controlling the reflections of sound, and a person would say, who's familiar with kind of the industry, would say, well, yeah, what else is there? Well, that's a good question. What else is there? Why did I say that, answer that question so carefully and specifically? In other words, the studios are built on the idea that the sound is expanding away from the source and hits the walls. And we don't like what the walls do to the sound, so we're going to beat the walls up, we're going to shape them up, we're going to straighten them up, we're going to do this and do that and add these things and take these away, and we're going to reform the walls, shape them up, make them behave right. Well, that's an attitude, isn't it? That's not always how the world works. That's just how the beginners in my training was the same as everyone else's. That's how we're taught to think of it. And then remember those recording engineers in those big studios I told you about? With that palette of TubeTraps? Well, what would happen is, because these guys were no slouches, okay? They lived on their ear. Oh, that's it. They don't need to think about things very much. They lived on their ear, and they followed their ear. I didn't realize there was a person even like that at the time, because I was an engineer, and what do I know? Like a few equations or something like that. So those engineers would call me up, usually late at night, but in those days I was young, and it was like we were in a band or something like that. It was a band of acoustics. But, you know, I mean, I was up late, they were up late. They'd call me from the East Coast usually, but it's sometimes the West Coast. And they'd say, hey, Art, I got to tell you something. And so they would tell me a story. And I'm busy taking notes with my pencil and like a good engineer, and I write down everything they say. I couldn't even imagine how to record what they said. And, but I wrote it down. And they said, you know, that this is fantastic. And they told me what they could do with it and blah, blah, blah. And so the next day I would go out and set up what they told me they set up. And I would try and hear what they told me they were hearing. And that was the beginning of me learning to hear what recording engineers hear. Now, it didn't happen overnight, but it was the beginning. And they were cooking up, and then another engineer would call and say, hey, Art, I got to tell you something. And they would tell me a story, the same story. And then a few weeks later, hey, Art, let me tell you, well, I cooked something up. This is fantastic. I'm thinking to myself, oh boy, I already know what they're going to say. The same story. And what is that story? They cooked up a thing which eventually was called the QuickSoundField. And the QuickSoundField is an amazing product. And it was invented by recording engineers in the Hit Factory and other major studios, not by me, not by somebody else. And, you know, it was by one real recording engineer who was making records after another, after another, after another. And I'm thinking to myself, if all these guys create the same sound effect, it must be right, because they're in charge of sound. And so I dedicated myself to paying very close attention to that, and not being so preoccupied with sales, but preoccupied with what the performance that the sale was delivering, which was nothing that I ever imagined. I thought I built a bass trap with a little treble diffuser on it. They weren't using it like that at all. It turns out what they were doing is what we've learned to talk about, which is shadow casting. In other words, The sound source is here. Around the sound source is a ring of things in the near field. And then what those things do is they cast an acoustic shadow onto the walls and the ceiling and the floor of the studio. The sound isn't hitting the wall in a clear and fresh way. It's already been deformed and changed in the near field. And so by the time it hits the wall, sound is spreading and scattering all over. You don't need a wall panel when there's no sound hitting the wall in that particular spot.
Mhm.
So what they were doing is they were making their live room disappear through this acoustic shadow technique. And so there I began to realize there are two techniques. Kill the sound, so to speak, when it arrives on the wall, kill it or diffuse it, whatever, but do something to it. When it hits the wall, that's one. The other one is do it before it hits the wall, long before it hits the wall. Do it within a few feet of sound travel, and then you cast these huge shadows all over the room, and which means sound isn't bouncing in those places. And so the room becomes a diffuser of sound rather than a reflector of sound, a diffuser, because it's a stripe of sound is getting there and a stripe of sound goes there and a stripe of sound goes there. Huge concept. So you basically literally erase the room and turn it into an ambience generator.
Mhm.
I didn't invent that. I paid attention to what was being done and figured it out like a good engineer will do, because I couldn't sleep until I figured it out. And it took a long time to figure it out. And, but it
Wow.
got figured out. I can tell you that.
So,
Un-
so when you started out, it was the bass traps first. What happens to the rest of the audio spectrum above the bass frequencies?
Oh,
When did that start happening?
Yeah, right. Well, but I didn't know anything in those days. And I mean, I knew enough to build a reasonably good bass trap, because that was what my problem was. But somebody called me from the East Coast early on, before we were a company even. And they had heard about the TubeTrap, and it was in a store, a hi-fi shop. And the guy's name was John Dahlquist. Well, I have no idea who I'm talking to, but he was smart, really smart.
Mhm.
And he's asking me all these questions, and I'm giving him the best answers I can. But remember, I'm inexperienced at that point in the effect of the TubeTrap. I just was an engineer who made the TubeTrap. He says, well, hey, it sounds great, this room acoustics thing, and put them in the corner and the modes and whatnot. So send me some. I'd like to listen to them. So, I didn't have any money, but I was poor, student with 4 kids in the house in my basement. But, somebody wanted one of my goodies, right? So like wanting one of my speakers. And so I happily build it and ship it off. And, a week later, he calls up and said, Howard, that's really great. I said, well, thank you. And he says, does everything you were talking about, but I said, oh, but okay. So, nothing worse than writing a song and having someone say, yeah, it was really great, but I said, well, oh, well, at any rate, he says, it did great in the bass, but it dried up the treble. It sucked the ambience out of the room. I said, oh, I'm sorry. He says, no problem. Just, can you cook up a crossover, an acoustic crossover, and so that it scatters highs? I said, oh, of course I can do that. I mean, why don't you say so? And, you have electronic crossovers to separate the signal from the bass woofer to the treble. There's acoustics and electronics go parallel with each other. They're very similar. And so I said, I know how to do an acoustic crossover. I knew electronics as well. But so he sends them back. I said, well, what frequency do you want it crossed over? He goes, sort of like a chef trying to figure out how much seasoning to put in his stew. Really. I mean, he was literally, hearing the adjustments as he tweaked through the frequency scale as to where that crossover should be. I knew what he was doing. I could feel it. And so I was on the same wavelength with him at that time. And he says, oh, about 600, that'll do. So he wanted everything above 600 approximately to get splashed back and everything below 600 to get sucked up in the corner, which is where the tube traps in those days were put. And so I said, no problem. So while everything was being shipped back to me, I'm busy making a crossover. And I know how to do that. And so when they came, I slipped them into the unit and had to tell him where the crossover was located. So I got an upholstery tack and I nailed it to the front of the tube trap. So the center of the reflector, which is halfway around the tube trap, the center of that reflector is in the middle. No, the tack, upholstery tack, is in the middle of the center of the reflector, just so the person knows where it is. Of course, if you have ears, you can hear it anyway, but it's just nice to have a visual cue. And I sent it back and he calls up and said, hey, that's really great. It's exactly what I wanted. It got the ambience back up into the room. And I'm thinking to myself, who cares, you know? But I learned early on that to quit being a wise guy because, and you know, kind of got humble. And the customer, the person that I'm talking to, knows more than me and is always right. And that, and I got, you know, squared up real good, real early in my career adventure, and learned many things because I believed the people knew what they were talking about. The problem was they're talking in gibberish. They talk in their own personal language that a performer would use to explain how they're vocalizing a song. Well, it doesn't make any sense to an engineer, but if you listen to them and believe them and say, there's an equation here, I got to write it down. Now, tell me that again. You know, if you work on it long enough, you can write the equation of what an artist is telling you. And so at any rate, that was the, so the product was, yes, it was originally designed by me, but it was voiced by essentially my first customer. And that's been the hallmark of my life and ASC's life, is the customers are always the ones who are directing the use and the evolution of and the use of the product. It's not like I'm a genius. I'm a good listener and I take real good notes. And then I pay attention to what I wrote down and try and recreate what the heck is going on around me, because it moved faster than I could ever have imagined. I couldn't imagine any of this stuff. It all came from the users of the tube traps in the industry.
Lovely.
Now, let me just not forget that part of the engineers who came back to me and said, hey, Art, I got to share something with you, okay? And I love to hear that, because there's a huge adventure awaiting me. I always say, okay. And so also the AttackWall was born by stacking tubes up. And from somebody that loved the QuickSoundField and bought a lot of tube traps and eventually kept messing around. Remember, the ear is what's leading the charge here. And it wasn't intellectual, and it's sonic. And the AttackWall was born. And so the AttackWall was for mixing, and it turns out, and the QuickSoundField is for tracking. And it's a fantastic 1-2 punch. And both of them independently derived by different engineers years apart. Both of them utilize the same principle, which is the shadow casting principle. Put the room in the dark, acoustically speaking, and you don't have a room problem. The room disappears from the mic. Forget about room acoustics. The irony was, once we started on the AttackWall and the QuickSoundField, we literally, kept thinking to myself, am I crazy? We're putting ourselves out of business, because our business originally was wall mounted, ceiling mounted, floor mounted, like everybody else, surface mounted acoustics. And now I'm working on shadow casting, which is wiping out the need for surface mounted acoustics. And I'm thinking to myself, this doesn't sound like a good business plan, but it was.
So, I mean, and with something like this, like you said, these are all patented. So it's not that someone else can just go out and do the same thing in the same.
Oh, they do it. They do it anyway. It's just patented, just so that the reason it's patented from my perspective is so people can sort of believe in it.
Sure.
Because it's been checked out by, you know, engineers and scientists who work in the patent office and have been determined that, yeah, this is a physical phenomenon. It's a physical thing. It hasn't been done before, and that we know of, and it's so significant enough of a physical thing that we can give it a patent. And the TubeTrap is and many variations of the TubeTrap is patented. And the latest version of the TubeTrap, which is the isothermal upgrade of the TubeTrap, which is a beautiful invention. I invented that too, and I'm the one that made all the products, but how to use them, that's the magic, and that comes from the customers and golden ears.
So so let's speak about your association with some of the golden ears in the business and how those relationships have evolved, you know, over the decades.
No, okay. One of the earliest ones was Pete Townshend, of the Who, you know, guy that's always crashing guitars. Of course, he doesn't do that anymore. Okay, so he bought a synclavier, and a synclavier was an early version of a synthesizer. You could basically sample a sound and then put that sound into a keyboard. So you would have every note you play is a note based on what that sound sounds like, sampling. And I don't know if people do that anymore or not, but anyway, that's what was going on then. The synclavier was the big thing. What happened is that they needed a really quiet room. And so in order to do sampling in, and so they, you know, at the time, you know, there was not very many, almost no one doing acoustics. And so we were like the only ones around. So they said, hey, what can you do for that? So I built them a room that was kind of like partially bright and partially dead, because it seemed to me, and it was kind of like a QuickSoundField, which has a live quality to it, early reflections coming back, and that are fused into the direct signal. And then there's a quietness to it as well. And so I mimicked the sound of the QuickSoundField because I knew that was good. People loved it. Engineers loved it. And I mimicked that in a room, you know, in a vocal booth setting by installing what we call half-round tube traps on the walls and on the ceiling. Okay, and that was a booth that traveled all around the world and was accompanied the synclavier demos. Okay, wow. And that was a huge deal in those days. And so everybody got to see the vocal booth, the very strange vocal booth or sampling room that was accompanied the introduction of the synclavier to the industry. So, you know, luck. But one thing leads to the next, because the QuickSoundField gave me the vision, the sonic vision of what to do in the vocal booth. And I can tell more stories about that vocal booth, but one of them was Pete Townshend saw that. He says, I want one of those, and I want that booth, whatever it is. And so he calls me up one day. Yeah, he did. And he says, I've got a room, it's called the boat room. Okay. And it's all different angles, it's non-parallel. And I said, well, that's good, surface acoustics, right? He says, but sounds awful. And I want you to turn into a sampling room. So I did. And we built all these products. I've still got all the drawings. And we built all the stuff. He shipped it over to England, you know, a big deal. And he installed it all and loved it.
Oh, wow.
Now the sampling room gave an acoustic signature. He called me up one day, like the other engineers, no, mind you, okay? He called me up one day and said, Art, I got a story to tell you. I said, okay. So, in his British accent. And so he tells this story. He said, I've got two mics in that room, near field mic and a far field mic up in the corner, 10 feet away, like everybody does. And he said, and I've got two faders, channel A and B. I've got two faders, and the engineer is wearing headphones, keep losing track of which fader is which, because they both sound the same. And he said, how can a microphone be a foot away and 10 feet away and give the same sound that my engineers can't even hear the difference? What's that about? I said, well, it's called, the sound fusion and the QuickSoundField. You have lots of reflections gluing themselves to the direct signal, so to speak, the Haas effect. And apparently you can have the direct be loud and the early reflections be, kind of medium loud, or you can have the direct be quiet and all the early reflections being, relatively louder. And apparently it gives the same sound. But I don't, who am I to say? I'm sitting at the end of a telephone, 2,000, whatever it is, miles away. He's the one that's experiencing. He says, okay, well, anyway, the joke is that I went out there and put a piece of tape on the fader and it says direct, and the other one says ambience. And that was his joke. And he thought it was funny as hell. And I'm thinking to myself, why is this a joke? Right? Why is it a joke? What does it mean? How can it be a joke? To him, it was a joke because, like, these guys are so stupid, they can't hear. But they can hear. How could that be a joke? That's not a joke. That's a clue. A clue. And about acoustic spaces and human hearing. It was a clue. It was amazing. It sent me on a long spiral, as you can imagine.
Wow.
And so that was Pete Townshend's experience. Bruce tells the story. Then he's met Pete, ran into Pete somewhere at some show in LA, and because Bruce was working in LA then, and he said, "Hey Pete, have you heard of these things called TubeTraps?" He says, "Oh, they're fantastic. You don't believe me, they're fantastic." So that registered in Bruce's brain. But he didn't call me, and he didn't buy any TubeTraps. It was just, yeah, they work. Okay, that's fine. Bruce was already happy. He knew how to mix hits and how to record. And he didn't need any help, like most engineers. They got their act together. They don't need help. They're not looking for help. In fact, if they make any changes in their audio chain, it's going to upset the apple cart, might upset the apple cart, because they've got a award-winning formula that they run. So time goes by, and Bruce is interviewed in a mixed magazine. I read the interview and I'm saying to myself, it scared me. Because the way he answered questions, I knew he could see sound. And I was seeing sound finally, seeing sound. That was a goal, my lifelong, well, not a lifelong goal, but, I've been working on sound for a long time. And, slowly, you learn about sound very slowly. And I was trying to see sound. And I don't mean literally watch it go by. But somehow get a cartoon running in my head that kind of went in slow motion of the sound. And I have that. But he could see sound. He described it in so many ways that I couldn't help myself. I wrote him a letter. This was after the QuickSoundField had been developed by the recording engineers. I wrote him a letter and I explained what I just said. And then I said, and I've got this, and how the engineers had developed it. And I said, this is a sound. This is a unique sound. And would you like to hear it? Well, Bruce, he's always game for hearing something new. And he would like to hear it. So he said immediately, he calls up because he doesn't like to write letters or write emails or anything like that. It's phone You know, if it's important, it's a phone call.
Yes.
And if it's not important, well, it's not a phone call.
Yeah.
He's old school. And I immediately get a phone call with this beautiful, deep voice guy at the other end. And you know what I'm talking about. And so he says, basically, yeah, I want to hear it. Whatever you're talking about sounds interesting. So I send it out a QuickSoundField, a set, again, for free. And you know, he calls up and says, okay, this is great. You know, sign me up. And so he bought a bunch of them, and that was the beginning of our relationship, which lasted a lifetime.
Wow. So, I mean, and with someone, you know, with the body of work that he'd already done, and let's say somewhere along his career, he comes up across something that has mattered so much that has stayed with him all the way till the end.
Yeah.
So, what was it, and what would he describe to you about what you had created? Could you share a little bit of that?
Well, there's two parts to that answer. It has two parts. One is the QuickSoundField, which is what Bruce heard, and that's used in tracking. That's controlling, that's getting the room out of the acoustic signature that the mic is hearing. And Bruce always worked in real studios and professionally built studios, but they all have a sound. The live rooms have sounds, and the control rooms have their own. They all have voices, so I like to say it that way. And you have to get used to the voice, the accent of the room. And if you mix according to that accent, or you mic according to that accent, you build the reverse of that accent into your track. And so you can't pay attention to the accent. You have to mix or set your mics up kind of like allowing for the accent, which means that the sound sounds wrong while you're working with it, but when you're finally done with it, it sounds right. So because you can't compensate for the way the room is affecting the mic or the mix in your decision process about how you're going to process that signal. It's like you can't get suckered into that, because you come out with a signal that is like, if the room is too boomy, so you EQ it down, you come out with a mix that's weak in bass. Wow, I didn't mean to do that. So you can't pay attention to what the room is telling you, which means you have to listen, but not too carefully. And yet, that's what you do, is listen very carefully. And it's very stressful to engineers to have to deal with that kind of monkey business all the time. Once they acclimate to the room, they're fine. They can mix a screwed up signal and get it right on the output, so it stays together the way it's supposed to be. But anyway, very difficult skill that you have to develop to kind of work inside out. I don't know. At any rate, but the QuickSoundField quieted the voice of the live room and increased the early reflections and breathed a kind of life into the signal. So you had a direct signal with a bunch of low-level early reflections that glue themselves to the direct signal. And these are all off-axis reflections, not on-axis. The direct is on-axis. Mm-hmm. These are off-axis early reflections, low-level early reflections, and it fills in and creates the sound, turns it into a whole sound. All the direct and off-axis signals all belong to the voice of the instrument, not just the direct. If you put the mic here, and you say, okay, that's what it sounds like. Oh, right, put the mic over here. Well, that's part of what it sounds like. Put the mic over here. Well, that's part of what it sounds like. Put the mic over here. Oh, that's what it kind of sounds like. Put the mic back here. Well, that's what it really sounds like. Well, what about all those other positions? The sound from the talent's going in all those directions. Whoever's in the room listening hears the direct plus all of those reflections. The microphone hears the direct, but doesn't hear the reflections, the early reflections that confuse to the direct signal. At any rate, but that's what Bruce heard, and for many years. Can I tell the story?
Of course.
Okay, so I have been nagging Bruce, saying, Bruce, you got to listen to this AttackWall. This is like really cool. You'd think that he would pay attention to me. Oh no, he doesn't want to hear anything about it. No, Artie. He gives me a nickname, Artie. I said, okay. I don't know where that came from, but I like it now. And no, Artie, and I'm okay. Don't worry about it. And the next time we're talking, I meet him somewhere. Hey, listen, the AttackWall. If you like the QuickSoundField, you're gonna love the AttackWall. Blah, blah, blah. No, thanks a lot, Artie. So we're doing a movie in the songwriter's house. Every time he sits at the piano, it sounds like a Michael Jackson song. And so he's Renee Moore, and big house in Hollywood. Everything's white. At any rate, we're doing a video shoot, and Bruce is going to, the beginning of a series. We never got to number 2 for whatever reason. But, a lot of times you start off on a project and it folds, before you get to issue 2. And at any rate, and the same thing in showbiz, I guess. At any rate, but it took a week. And I was there with a truckload of tube traps. I drove it down myself and to LA from Eugene, which is, 1,000 miles. And we set up all the setups because Bruce uses the QuickSoundField in all of his work. And so at the end of it, everyone's in the kitchen eating ribs and white bread, and which was lots of fun. And I wasn't eating it because I thought to myself, and I talked to my assistant, I said, let's set up the AttackWall. So we set the AttackWall up. Well, they're all having a party in the kitchen, and we're in the den, so to speak, of this house. And we set the AttackWall up. And we had little Genelecs, so we put them in the wall, in the AttackWall, and we turned the sound on. And remember, most of these guys, some of them are techs, but most of them are golden ear type characters, okay, including Bruce. So, but who's hanging around are people that make music or listen to music, and they're good, tops. They come floating from the kitchen, they clean their hands up, and they go floating upstream towards the sound, because they're saying, well, where's that coming from? Between the kitchen and the family room, which is where the AttackWall was set up, was the old school control room. Huge speakers, gigantic console, as you can imagine.
Yes.
And they're walking past the console, and they keep looking at the speakers, and they're not on. And so they pass, but they're looking at, because they think that somebody's just playing music in the control room. No. And so now they go past the speakers into the next room, and there's this giant AttackWall with these 2 little first generation Genelecs, not that big of a speaker, kicking butt. And Bruce was leading the herd, and he plops down and sits in that chair, and now he's listening. Now he's listening to the AttackWall, right? How did he listen to the AttackWall? I had to trick him, right? I had to make it play sound and then stand back and say nothing and let him and his little golden ears find what's making that fantastic sound. Do you understand what I'm saying? Words didn't cut it. He kept telling me no. And the only way I could get him to hear it was to trick him and sneak it on him, okay? And he, in the end, he laughed about it and knew about what I did, because I got him. Finally, it took 2 years to get him. And because he would always say no to the words, but he didn't say no to the sound. And I'll skip a story or two. And the bottom line is, he turned around and he says, Artie, I'm not working a day more until I get this installed in my house. I said, Bruce, we just finished building your studio in your house. Room acoustics, right? All the stuff on the walls and on the ceiling, blah, blah, blah. And it was a good sounding room. He says, I don't care. I want that all torn out, and I want this in that room, and I'm not working until it's done. So you better get it done. Okay. He said that he heard a mic placement in the AttackWall. When he would walk around with this in those days with a bag full of DATs, and each DAT had a little clip of a piece of music that he had recorded and mixed, and he knew by heart. And he would use that to acclimate himself to these goofy rooms that he would always be working in, like the Hit Factory or whatever. But every room had a voice, which you had to learn and then work kind of the inverse of the voice. And so he said, I heard the mic placement in one of those big band, Dorsey band or something like that. I don't know who it was. He placed a mic in a certain spot. And he said, I heard that mic. I saw that mic in the AttackWall. He said, I have completely forgot about, I never heard that mic, never saw that mic, and I've played that DAT in all the top studios in the world, and I never, ever saw that mic. I completely forgot about it until I'm sitting here with this AttackWall. That's how good it is. And he said, if I can see that mic that I put 20 years ago and made a recording of, I put it there. I know where it is because I can see it now, but I forgot about it. And so he's describing to me what's so cool about the AttackWall. Well, what am I to say? I mean, it wasn't my AttackWall, and belonged to an engineer that put it together years before. Called me up one day and said, hey, Art, I got something I got to show you, and one thing led to the next. And so anyway, so we tore a studio apart, fixed all the walls, and set the AttackWall up, and he's been hooked ever since. And never looked back, never questioned it. It's like flying a rocket ship. It's like, it's out of this world. But words don't cut it. You have to hear it to believe it. And that's, that was another example, with Bruce. And I'd already was a proven commodity, our products and the techniques and things like that. And he still said no, over and over and over. I couldn't figure out how to break him down. But I couldn't break him down with words, but with sound. That was the trick. So we go back to the same old story. And what Bruce would always say, he says, you can quote me on this, Artie. You got to hear it to believe it.
This is so true.
And that's a big statement. And it also is how the business evolved. The only reason we ever got a customer is because they heard it in another studio. All the advertising didn't do any good. Nothing makes any difference except hearing it and saying, ooh. When an engineer takes a mix that they've done and plugs it into the AttackWall, and they've never heard it on the AttackWall before, they immediately go, oh, all the things that they were guessing at in the fog of the sonic stage and the sound, the fog of the sound and the fog of the imaging, all those ghostly monsters that were attacking them, the room acoustic, monsters of the room acoustic that were attacking they're trying to see through it and it's shining back at them. They say, oh, and these are like nightmares. They have nightmares about the decisions they make because they couldn't see. And so they have to guess because they can't see anymore, but they know something's wrong. And so they make a guess and they place things in certain spots, but they can't see where they're working because the room is so loud, it's blocking everything. And so they have to, and the good engineers guess right, and the not so good engineers guess wrong. And so when you listen on the attack wall, which there's no room anymore, remember, when you listen on the attack wall, you hear your nightmares come alive, and then you end up saying, well, I got to go remix that thing. Ship me an attack wall, or can I rent one? Where can I get to one? And you know, it's always that way. And so, but you know, how do you write an ad like that that would connect with anyone? You can't. It's just, you got to hear it to believe it, and be patient and let nature take its course.
Yeah. Oh, but I think that's so important. And I mean, it's so lovely to hear that, because it stood up for itself. No matter how much one is trying to go and sell something, you know, I mean, I have nothing to say. You've already said it. Do you want to share a little bit about, you know, when we spoke about, when you said when there's a gap between the attack wall, when it's set up in like a production or a mixing environment, and how the gap and how the sound travels through that and what it does? Could you shed a little bit of light on that? Because I think that's so fascinating to.
What? Okay, so when there's a gap, okay, here's something that is absorbing sound, and here's something that's absorbing sound. In between is a gap. What happens is the sound is absorbed here or backscattered, and it's absorbed here or backscattered to the mic, okay. Or engineer, whatever, but backscattered. The sound that goes through expands into the shadow zone. Sound goes, here's the corner of a building. Sound, you can talk here and be here, and guess what? You can hear what someone's saying around the corner of a building. Go do it. Have a conversation around the corner of a building. No problem at all. Sound expands into the shadow zone. Sound from here, it doesn't go like a bullet out there. It goes, boo. It spreads around the corner, and this part of the sound is semi-unaffected, but this part of the sound bends around the corner and goes that way. That's what's beautiful about sound. This is like, it's very slippery and very tricky until you get to know it. And at any rate, so sound goes through the gap and expands. And so now, instead of sound going out like this, sound is, some of it disappeared, which turned the volume down on the sound that's going into the room. And what does get through expands. And so now, instead of going in this direction, with the big wavefront going in that direction, we get little stripes of wavefronts going in all directions. The sound leaving the gap is pre-diffused before it even hits the wall of the room. It's a fantastic idea. Remember, I didn't invent it. I just took notes and wrote the equation of what someone else invented. The golden ears invented this stuff, not me. I kept it alive. That's all I did, because it was too important to let die, go off chasing some other dream. No way, not to be handed a gift like that.
So now the magic is, and with the developments and the innovation and the feedback and what it has become today, is that you have something which is so potent and so impactful that you can actually have anybody work anywhere in the world in any kind of room and still give it that much respect.
Professional grade, better than professional grade sound in
Yes.
any room. And because the room is removed from the equation, it's just an ambient sound mixer. That's, it's basically like a reverb and you can adjust the volume of the reverb. It's not in control. The mic doesn't even hear the room.
Wow. It's so amazing. I mean, it is.
Yeah, it is.
And how was this received by, there are, well-known like acousticians and designers of studios all over the world, and people who spend multi-million dollars on studios. And when something like this comes along, now Art is here with his bag of tricks.
Right. Yeah.
How did that go down?
Just exactly. Everybody's got, you know, their shtick to protect. And so the acousticians, it's a threat to them because it's a challenge to their normal way of doing business and their normal way of understanding. And they stay away from it. They don't want to hear it. They kind of want to stay away from it, because what are they going to do when someone pulls the rug out from? I thought I was bringing something to the industry. I had no idea that I would run into a brick wall of businessmen, and that's what happens in the industry. So you have to stand on your own 2 feet. You can't join in with anyone else because they don't want you, because you're talking nonsense as far as they're concerned. Well, they haven't tried to understand, and they haven't listened. And they're making a living doing what they love to do, which of course is what I used to love to do, which is to put stuff on the walls of the room and try to destroy this reflection that sounds like a room, try to destroy it by absorption and diffusion at the first point of impact. And to talk about, you know, changing the way the sound behaves long before it impacts is like, what? You know, we're not having the same conversation at all. It's a different world. And so, you know, I'm sorry that they don't see it, but I understand it. It's business. You know what I'm saying? Hey, nice to meet you, Art, but you know, it's nothing personal. It's business. I mean, that's a reality too. Not a fun one to run into, but it is.
Sure. No, but it's great. I mean, because I think you're driven with there's a utopic seeking on something that you have had the talent and then enhanced it to the extent that you have, to be so sensitive to it, and then sharing that experience with others, you know. And unless you hear it, like it is said now, like you said it and you were saying it, that unless you experience it, one really doesn't know what we're talking about.
Exactly.
So,
It's like talking gibberish. And you know, I appreciate that, because I came from the same world. I was just like them. And I had to hear it to believe it too. When they were talking to me, I'm going like, what? But what I did is I said, because I was humble and knew I didn't know very much, I said, they must be right. Just because I go, what, doesn't mean that I know anything. They know something I don't know. They're talking to me about what they experienced. They're not talking to me about what I've experienced. There's a big difference between walking around and high-fiving everybody, saying, yeah, dude, yeah, we're on the same wavelength. No, they're on a different wavelength. I had to catch up with them. I didn't know what the hell they're talking about. So I eventually had to leave my training behind and follow the sound. And that's a hard thing to do, because you're trained in school and trained in all the communications and magazines and books. And I mean, I got a big library. You're trained to think a certain way. And then to have someone talk to you about a different way is like really hurts. It bothers you. It's like getting hosed with a sprayer, and someone's, you know, you don't want to get hosed with a sprayer, but they're insistent that they discovered something, and then they keep harassing me, my clients, until I admit that, you know, until I figure out what they're talking about, kind of, and join in their bandwagon, not mine. I didn't make this stuff up. But that's in a way the beauty of it. It was made by golden ears.
oh, lovely.
Make their worlds work better. Adventurers brave explorers, golden years that pushed ahead beyond what made any sense, and but made sound sense, not talk sense and brain sense, sound sense. And that's all they care about, and that's all they do. And when they discover something, you better pay attention to what they discovered, because they're no slouches. They're the ones making the records. You got to remember who the client is. He's not a dumb cookie. You know, he's like the leader. And when the leader says, oh, here's a good one. I'll think of his name in a minute. He's from Canada, an acoustic genius, and well funded by the Canadian government. I was funded by nobody. He's funded by the Canadian government, research and acoustics and all this kind of stuff. And now he's finally moved to LA and in basking in the warmth of LA intellectual community and whatnot. His name will come to me, don't just wait. And so I said, oh, this guy's a sharp guy. So I said, hey, listen, I wanted to talk to you about, you know, what I'm working on over here. It's really cool. And so I explained it. He says, oh yeah, bass trap in the corner of the room. Yeah, got it. Hey, listen, thanks a lot. He cut me off because he's real busy and his world makes sense to him. And he's on a roll, his role, classic acoustics, traditional acoustics, that role. And he very quickly categorized the product and didn't wait to hear about what it does. Oh, a bass trap in the corner. Got it. Bye. Thanks. See ya. Gotta go. Busy. Click. Never listened to it, categorized it, dismissed it, and missed the acoustic evolution that was going on.
Gosh, you know what, Arthur? This is going to be the first of, I think, many conversations which are going to come up in the few weeks and the months, because
Good.
I mean, with all the new music that's going to be created through this series, you know, and
yes,
I know we know the impact, and our team knows the impact the AttackWall has had to the way we work and the results that come out. You know, so I really cannot thank you enough for what you have come up with and what you have amalgamated everyone's information, inputs from the golden years to the experience yourself into what is such a successful experience today. You know, so, and I think it's a privilege to have been exposed to it and to have heard it and to have it, you know. So it's words cannot truly express, and it's like unless you've experienced it, you don't know what you've been missing. You know, or like you said, there are things in this work which you wished weren't there because you could never make them out before with that much detailing and ease. So no, but I thank you so much for today. This is the first in the series of such conversations, and with the Global Icon, the idea is to create awareness. You know, everybody wants a hit, everybody wants success. They want to be successful in the music business, but these are some of the core, I think, building blocks that make those experiences not just great, but iconic. They transcend time. And these are the tools that help us, you know, reach to that destination in a controlled and not guessy manner always. Sometimes, yes, accidents are fun and good things come out of accidents or the unknown. But a true master, a wizard, is someone who has the whole, you know, the wand under their control. And I think that's what the attack wall and the products and tube traps and what you developed with ASC is totally phenomenal in the hands, especially of a wizard. And I think everyone is a potential wizard. They just have to know that they have the capability. You know?
So well said. Let me tell a little story. So big story, but a short one, I hope. So this fellow went to, I taught all the acoustic classes for Bruce's mentoring program. And in the studio with Bruce Swedien, and you know, people from all over the world would come and attend this class. And I taught the Bruce acoustics class, which we could talk about maybe another time. This guy named Mick was there. He's from Greece, and he listened to the deal, saw Bruce's, learned from Bruce, and he said, okay. And so he bought some studio traps, but after he got to Greece, the duty in Greece, 100%.
Oh,
Plus shipping.
yes.
It's, so, and there's no way around it. So he bought 2 tube traps, studio traps, and paid, now he paid for 4 plus shipping across the ocean. But he was able to, using 2, he was able to improve the quality of sound in his ultimate product. He would put one studio trap on either side of the microphone with the reflectors turned away, and use an Omni mic, so he gets a beautiful sound instead of cardioid, and then an Omni mic with some distance, and all you're getting, and you're not getting any sound from either side. Okay, the 2 sides of the room are erased, and the sound that goes forward has run into the 2 tube traps that are on either side of the mic. So there's this huge shadow that's cast on the end wall of the room, and then the sound that goes around it is diffused. That 2 tube traps, one on either side of an Omni mic, had enough in it that he was able to record better, make better recordings, and catch the notice of the big talent in Greece.
Oh, lovely.
And that next year he ordered 2 more, and things went up again. He could make more money, and then he ordered 4 more, and now he's got a huge studio full. He calls me up one day. He says, Art, I got to thank you. As if I had anything to do with it.
Oh.
I'm just the carrier of the message. I got to thank you. And you made my life. I said, Mick, what are you talking about? I mean, we'd worked on his studio, you know, and talked many times. And plus he was my student. And he says, I've become the engineer I always knew I was, but I couldn't be it. I kept getting beat up, and I kept losing and feeling like, how come I am not as good as I know I am?
Oh.
Exactly what you said. But the 2 traps and the QuickSoundField and the AttackWall, not Art, the QuickSoundField engineers long ago, and the engineer Sam Lin invented the AttackWall. Those are the things that got him so he could hear and see clearly and make the decisions he was born to make.
Oh, how fantastic is that?
And become his real self.
Oh.
His dream came true. How could you can't have anything better than that?
Yeah. I mean, that's
so that's just a story about exactly what you said.
Great. So I mean, so this we will call the session 1 of many with Art, because it
would be fun.
Yeah. So we'll break it down actually into the more like focused conversations as we go ahead. But I think this was a great overview for those you know, who attended and will be seeing this recording, because it's going to be put up, and we will share the link. You can share it to your network, where we hear about definitely, you know, songwriters and music producers today, you know, and everyone who has access to the tools of music making and of course the next generation of artists. But this is such an important ingredient that sometimes, if again, it's like the whole cycle, unless you're exposed to it and you experience it yourself, you may not have value for this, and it's just intellectual conversation and writings and other people's experiences. It is something that is a must have experience, because once you've experienced it, I can assure you, from my personal experience, that there isn't anything out there
You
that
can't
can
forget
help
it.
you discover yourself and your potential. And the delight of that experience is just so wonderful. So I would really encourage all those who would watch this, and please check out Arthur's work. Please check out Acoustic Sciences Corporation, Tube Traps, Bass Traps, the QuickSoundField, the AttackWall, and the wonderful, not just products, I would call them the wonderful, the pixie dust that they've created, that if you just keep it around yourself, you will end up making a magical experience for yourself and for your listeners. And that's what it's all about. When it transcends time, you know, it's something that goes beyond. And we will talk about that, because Bruce used to speak about that a lot. How do you make records that are timeless? And it's not an accident. And that's again one of the things that he pioneered, and that which some of it is what we do in our work now, is to make records which transcend time. And but for that, you've got to be careful what you do. And we will speak about that more in the upcoming series. But thank you so much, Art, for today. Would like to open up for any Q&As. If we have attendees, please use the Q&A boxes for any questions. Otherwise, this webinar, this interview will be up on a couple of channels. We will post it out. You can have a listen to it. And when we come back next time, again, there would be an opportunity for questions. Uh, so let's see if there are any questions coming in. We'll just give them a minute. Okay, so you have. So what are some of the most effective ways to treat a small one-room studio, home studio, for mixing music?
That's a question. And so I'm always, money is a problem. And that has to be part of the conversation. I'm always tempted to try and fix the room in the traditional ways. On the other hand, the basic ideas really don't need to be using tube traps. I would say if you're in a trying to work in a room, you should somehow absorb sound that is near the speaker. So you have a speaker. You want to absorb the sound to the left of it and to the right of it and above it and below it. So get some sound panels or some wool blankets and come up with a way to create an acoustic, not a hard, but an acoustic soffit. So the speaker is playing out of a sound absorbing disc, so to speak. That right there, and you have a left and a right, that right there will be so astonishing and give you such clear vision. And remember, if you ever want to wonder, what are you doing? Imagine screwing a light bulb into the center of your loudspeaker, your woofer, and then turn the light bulb on. And then where is the light shining? Well, it's shining on you. It's shining above and to the left and to the right, but it's not shining to the other half of the room, to the room that's on the back side of the plane of the speakers. There's no sound going back there. Go back there and listen to the sound behind the speakers, and you'll be stunned. It's quiet, even in the bass range. And you didn't do any acoustics. You just put 2 discs up, so to speak, of absorption. Don't get the discs too close to the edge of the speaker box. Sounds going from the tweeter out. And here's the speaker box. And the sound goes from the tweeter out. The sound feels the edge of the speaker box. And that's part of the voice of the speaker. And don't screw around with that edge. Stay away from the edge. Once the sound has gotten past the edge, and you can fiddle around down here, and you won't change the voice of the speaker. But if you fiddle around up here, you will change the voice of the speaker, and that is not your job. Your job is to let that speaker continue to sing with its natural voice that you fell in love with, or the customer fell in love with. Your job is to not change the voice of the speaker, but so you have to set your acoustic up, not on top of the speaker, but back from the speaker, so the speaker stands proud from the acoustic that you have set up. That's the trick.
Cool. I mean, you do little stuff like that, you can hear a whole dramatic effect on your experience, and it'll impact your work, and it'll impact the experience of the listeners. And that's where it all adds up. So for the business guys, this results to better sales when you give a better experience. So everything matters. Every part of the chain matters.
Yeah.
Well, good. Unless there are any other questions for now, we'll bring a closure to this interview. Arthur, thank you so much. It's been great knowing you. It's been great interacting with you and learning from you. And of course, having listened to what you've developed, it is just nothing less of phenomenal. So really, congratulations to you and your team.
Oh yeah.
For all the lovely work. And we will be in touch. And of course, in the coming weeks, when we will schedule the next one, we will also touch upon a little bit about Stonehenge and what you shared some time back, because
that was
I
so
think
fun.
it is phenomenal. It truly is. And when you look at it, actually, it's not that surprising.
Yeah,
it's
right.
just that, like you said, someone observed it, someone took notice of it. And then, like you said, you decipher it and you reverse engineer or understand with something that exists out there. And I think there's just so much to talk. It cannot be bottled up in 1 hour or one discussion.
No.
So I would love to keep this going, continuing through the series, and share your lovely work with people and get them awareness, and they will never be the same again. And I remember Bruce saying that. He says, now, when you leave this room and go out, nothing is the same ever again. And it's true. And some things will never be the same again, for good reason.
Yes. I know what you mean.
So great.
Okay. Well, listen, thanks for letting me, inviting me and to join. And we have a lot of work to do with IKON, and that's real important. And because helping people make good music so that they can fulfill their dreams is a duty.
I tell you,
if you can do it.
You and with others who have the specialties that you have are actually the true hidden global icons. Let me tell you. It's just that we were made aware of it and we had the opportunity to experience it maybe earlier on, and maybe many people haven't had that opportunity, but when they will, and that's what we want to do with the outreach from this platform, is to spread the good word. That's what it is. So thank you again for sharing, and we will be in touch.
Okay, bye for now.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you all who have attended, and be on the lookout for the next posts, and see you soon. Bye bye from the Global Icon.